So, portion is Behar B'chukosai, the book of Vayikra, chapter 25. It's a double portion. Vayidaber Adonai Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor. So God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. Let me just say, Mount Sinai, place dear to my heart. It's just where I was. I was just at Mount Sinai. I was at Mount Sinai either in Jebel Harb, which is where Rabbi Alexander Hul argues that it was, and I was also at Jebel Makla, Jebel Laos, which is where most of the non-Jewish scholars think it is. So that's where Mount Sinai is. So God spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai saying, by the way, it doesn't say on the top of the mountain, the peak of the mountain. It's hard to imagine that Moshe at 80 years old was rappelling up the mountain to get there. And you look at it, it's a real climb. It's not just a hike, it's a climb. So it says he spoke to him on the mountain. Here it doesn't say he spoke to him on the top of the mountain. Okay, so let us go to the Rashi. The Rashi said, excuse me. Rashi says, Ma inyan Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. Why? Because we're about to talk about the Shemitah passage. What does that have to do with Mount Sinai? Why does it say here specifically that he spoke on Mount Sinai? We saw in the Daf Yomi on Friday, Sota 37, a dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. What exactly was taught at Sinai? With Rabbi Akiva saying all the details and all the general rules, and Rabbi Yishmael says only the general rules were taught at Sinai, but not the specifics. So therefore, why, according to Rabbi Akiva, where everything was taught at Mount Sinai, why does it have to specify that the laws of the Shemitah were taught at Mount Sinai? That's what Rashi says. Weren't all the commandments taught at Sinai? Just like the sabbatical year was said with its general rules and specifics and all of its intricacies at Sinai. So to all of them were said with their general rules and their specifics at Sinai. So Rashi is paskening like Rabbi Akiva. And it appears to me that this is its explanation. Because we don't find that the laws of Shemitah of the lands, i.e., that you know how to work the land in the 7th year, we don't find that this was repeated at the plains of Moab. So, which is where in Deuteronomy the Torah was repeated. We learn from here. So therefore, the general rules and the specifics were all stated at Sinai. So Rashi is saying that is to teach us that everything was said at Sinai, all its generals and specifics, and then everything was repeated in the plains of Moab in all its generals and specifics. And that's why it says specifically that Har Sinai, that the laws of Shemitah were taught at Mount Sinai, because they're not repeated in the book of Deuteronomy. So we might have thought it wasn't repeated. So we're saying that everything was said at Sinai and everything was repeated. So it seems it's really interesting why Rashi decides to paskin like Rabbi Akiva and doesn't say Rabbi Yishmael is correct, because Rabbi Yishmael says that all the specifics were not taught at Sinai. So it's interesting that Rashi chooses to paskin like Rabbi Yishmael, like Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay. So this is the verse that was taught at Mount Sinai. Now we're up to the next verse. And it says that Beryl B'nai Yisrael v'amarto speak to the B'nai Yisrael and say to them, Ki tavo ha'aretz asher ani noseh lachem v'shavsa ha'aretz shabas l'Adonai. When you come to the land that I will tell you, that I will give to you, and you v'shavsa ha'aretz, and the land shall rest, a Shabbos l'Hashem, a Shabbos for God. The land is going to have a rest for Hashem. What does Rashi say here? Shabbos l'Hashem l'shem Hashem. It has to rest for the purpose of God. Just like, meaning to say, not that God is resting. It's not that that Hashem is observing Shabbos, but it's a Shabbat rest for the purpose of serving God. Kishem shenemar b'Shabbos Bereshis, just like it says in Shabbos Bereshis, the same idea. What does it say by Shabbos Bereshis? It says that we are resting to commemorate God's creation of the world, or the Exodus. So too, we're resting here on the seventh year as a way of serving Hashem. Shabbos Hashem. Excuse me. And so we see from here that what are we supposed to be doing on the seventh year? It's supposed to be a year of serving Hashem. So that's what the seventh year has to be. If we're not working the land, we're supposed to be working for Hashem, for serving God. Now we come up to the third verse. Sheish shanim tizra sadecha, 6 years you shall plant your field. Sheish shanim tizmor karmecha, 6 years you shall prune your vineyard. Mosaftos tvuasa, gather in your crops. There's no Rashi on that verse. V'shana shviyis, and in the seventh year, Shabbat Shabbason yel aretz. It will be the sabbaticals of the sabbaticals in the land. Shabbos LaHashem, a Shabbos for God. Sadachalo tizra, your field you shall not plant. V'karmachalo tizmor, and your vineyard you shall not prune. What does that mean? Rashi says, Yiyela arts, it'll be a Shabbat Shabbaton for the land, V'asadot u'kramim, for the fields and the vineyards. Lo tizmor, you can't prune the vineyard. So Rashi says, Shekotitzinu morosea, you can't prune because that's cutting off its vines. V'targumo lo tichsach, and it's rendered by Targum as lo tichsach, do not trim. V'domelo kotzim kisuchim, cut thorns. Srufa ba'esh kisucha, burnt by fire, cut off. Ace, so that's the fourth verse. Now we're up to the fifth verse. The sefiach is the stuff that grows wild in the field. The sefiach, the aftergrowth of your harvest, do not harvest. As in vain is irecha, and the grapevines of your, in vain is irecha, the grapes of your Nizirecha, we'll have to see what that means. Rashi is going to tell us. We know what a Nazir is, but we'll see what Nizirecha means. These things, lo tivtzor, do not pick them. Shanat Shabbaton yel aretz. It'll be a sabbatical year. What does it mean? Rashi says the wild growth of your harvest. It's a fiach ketzircha lo tivtzor. What does it mean you can't harvest it? You're allowed to harvest it, but you can't harvest it. Rashi says lios machzik bo, to take possession. Bishar katsir, like other harvests. Ela hefker yeh makol. It's onerous for everybody, meaning to say, you're allowed to eat the fruit of the sabbatical year. You're just not allowed to, but you just have to make it onerous. That's the point. You need to make it onerous. You're allowed to eat it. Some even say it's a mitzvah to eat it. But you have to make it available for everybody. That's the idea of the sabbatical year. Make it available for everybody. And then in Vei Nizirecha, what's the grapes of your Nizirecha? Rashi says, Shehin Zarta Ve'efrashta. These are the grapes that you kept away. B'nei Adam Mehem, Lo'ef Kartem. If you kept people away from your grapevines, you don't let anybody pick the grapes, well, that's a sin. And then Lo Tivtzoro some. Then you know how to harvest them. Eincha Botzer Element Amufkar. You're only allowed to harvest those which were declared ownerless. Okay, so Vaisa, verse 6. Vaisa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem lacha. This land will be to you. It will rest. Vaisa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem lacha. This land will be for you to eat. For you and for your slaves and for your maids. This land will be for you to eat, for you and for your slaves and for your maids and for your hired workers and those who live with you. Okay, so this land will be for you to eat, for you, for your slaves, for your maids, and those who work for you. They all can eat it. What does Rashi say here? Rashi says, alecha, even though I forbid the land upon you, I didn't forbid it with eating or deriving or getting a benefit. You're allowed to eat the food and you're allowed to get benefit from it, but you're not allowed to act like you're the owner of it. That's what Rashi is saying. You can't act. Don't pretend. Excuse me. Don't pretend you're the balabayas. You're not. This year, God is the balabayas. Ella, I call you Shabbat. Everybody is equal. You and your workers and those who dwell amongst you, everybody is equal. Shabbos ha'aretz lachem lacha, she says. Min Rebbe Eliezer, help yourself to some rasolnik soup. We have some rasolnik soup in there. Yeah, it's fresh. Rasolnik soup? Yeah. You don't like it?
I like it. It's tangy. The pickles, it's good.
Well, it's potato soup with cucumbers. Pickles, cucumbers. Pickles, cucumbers are pickles.
Sour. It's delicious.
You ever have that? Judah, potato soup with pickles? That's the soup. Anyway, that's the soup of the week in the yeshiva. It's Shemitah year for everybody. Everybody can eat it. Well, you're nodding your head, Judah. Okay, fine. Potato soup with pickles. And it's delicious. Shabbos ha'aretz lachem lacha. So this is the resting of the land for you to eat. You can eat min hashvusa tochel v'iyat tochel min hashamor. Meaning to say, in the sabbatical year, you're only allowed to eat from the food that was left ownerless. But if somebody protected the food, he locked it up, and then he wants to offer it to you, that you're not allowed to eat from. You're only allowed to eat from the food that was left ownerless. That's the law of the sabbatical year. For you and your slave and your maid, since it states about the sabbatical year, and the poor people of your nation shall eat it, I might think that the rich people can't eat it. For you and your slave and your maidservant, everybody can eat from it as long as you don't pretend like you're the owner of it. That's the key point. For your hired workers and one who lives with you. Even the non-Jews can eat from it. Okay. Rashi, the next verse says, leave the food abandoned in the field, and so your animals and the wild animals that are in your land all of them are able to eat it. Rashi says, well, if a wild animal can eat it, for sure your domesticated animal might eat it. Because you're required to feed the domesticated animal. So why does the verse say so it's to teach us another law. So it's to teach us a fundamental rule. When are you allowed to feed the food in the field to your animals? As long as the wild animal is still eating from it. Then you can feed it in your house to your domesticated animals. But once the food is no longer in the field, then you cannot give the sabbatical food to your animal. That's a very important principle of the sabbatical year. Okay. Now, verse 8. And so now, in addition to the sabbatical year, we have the law of, in addition to the sabbatical year, we now have the law of the Jubilee year. You shall count 7 Shabbatot Shanim. Sheva Shanim, Sheva Pamim. You shall count 7 sabbatical years. 7 years, 7 times. Vayucha Yimei Sheva Shabsos Shanim, Teishav Arbaim Shana. And then you should count for yourselves the 7 sabbatical years, 49 years. So the Jubilee year is going to come after 7 years, 7 cycles of the 7-year period. Rashi tells us, Shmitos Shanim. Hold on 1 second. Excuse me for 1 second. Let me just give me 1 second. So you have to count 7 years. You have to count 7 years 7 times. I might think you should count Sheva Shanim Tzufot Shemitah. I might think you should count 7 consecutive years of Shemitah at the end of the 49 years. And then it'll get to the Jubilee year afterwards. Meaning to say, you might think that after 49 years, you count 7 straight sabbatical years, and then you have the Jubilee year. The verse tells us, Tamomar Sheva Shanim Sheva Pamim. Kol Shmita Ushmita Bezmana. No, each sabbatical year you count as one, and then after the 7 times 7 years, you get to the Jubilee year. Vayucha Yemei Sheva, and then the days. Vayucha Yemei Sheva, and then the days of the 7 sabbatical years shall be for you. Magilucha is to tell you Sha'avapisha Lo Asita Shmitot, even if you didn't keep the Shemitah year, Asa Yovel becomes a Jubilee year. But so far by invitation Shana. After 49 years is the Jubilee year. Upshuto Shal Mikra, Yalcha Cheshbon Shnot Shmitot, and Mispar by invitation. The total of the years of the Shmitot shall add up to the number 49. Okay. Now up to verse 9. Very, very powerful verse. 49, verse 9 and 10. Very, very, very powerful verses. Very powerful. It states, Vavarta shofar trua b'chodesh hashvi'i. You shall blast the shofar, a shofar blast in the 7th month, Be'asor HaChodesh, in the 10th day of the month, B'yom HaKippurim, on the day of Yom Kippur, Taviru shofar b'chol artzachem, blast the shofar throughout your land. Rashi says, Va'avarta, Lashon, Vayaviru kol b'machaneh. They made a voice in the camp. Lashon achrazah means a proclamation. B'yom HaKippurim, on the day of Yom Kippur, Mimash Mashanever B'yom HaKippurim. From the fact that it says Yom Kippur, Eini Odea Shuba Asar HaChodesh, I know it's the 10th day of the month. So in Kelamanez Mar Be'ezra Chodesh, why is it on the 10th day? Umarachat Tkiya Shofar LaChodesh Docha Shabbos B'chol Artzachem. The blowing of the shofar, Tkiya Esor LaChodesh, the blowing of the shofar in the Jubilee year overrides the Shabbos. B'chol Artzachem, wherever you are. After Tkiyas Rosh Hashanah Docha Shabbos B'chol Artzachem. El based in Mavad. But the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah only overrides Shabbos in the court in Jerusalem, in the temple. Okay. Rashi says, you shall sanctify the 50th year. You have to declare freedom in the land. Let there be freedom in the land for all those who dwell there. Freedom in the land for all who dwell there. Freedom in the land. It shall be a jubilee year for you. And each person shall return to his inheritance. When everybody goes back to their family, Rashi says, at its onset, you shall sanctify them in the Bezdin, you shall sanctify them in the court, and you shall say, the year is sanctified. Rashi, ukarasem deror, you shall declare freedom in the land. La'avadim, for the Hebrew slaves. Bein nirtza, bein shlo kolo sheishanim. Whether he had his ear pierced, meaning to say he's going to, hello, my friend Larry, whether he's going to have his ear pierced and therefore he'll be a slave forever, or whether he has not yet completed 6 years, misha nimkar, from when he was sold. Meaning to say, from the time whatever a Hebrew slave is, he goes free in the Jubilee year. All Hebrew slaves go free in the Jubilee year. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, and we recently had this Gemara. This is a Gemara. Where do we have this recently? We had this recently in Rosh Hashanah 9b. What is the definition of freedom? Ma'u lashon deror. What is meant by the term freedom? Kemedayer be daira vikulu. One who dwells in a dwelling place, meaning shadar b'kol makom sherotzeh. Freedom means to live wherever you want. Ve'eno b'rshus acherim. He's not under the dominion of others. Let me explain to you that I realized this this past week. So when I'm in Saudi Arabia, everybody was not free because they were living very nicely. It was everything ran on time. The people did not seem upset, but they weren't free because I'll give you an example. We had a woman driver. We all went in Jeeps. You had to go in Jeeps to get to Mount Sinai because the bus couldn't make it there. So the woman driver drove us from Tabuk. It's like a 3-hour drive. So when we're in Tabuk, she comes to pick us up wearing the, I don't know exactly what it's called, the full body covering, and the only thing visible are her eyes.
Burqa.
Not a burqa. It's with an N, a nakif or something like that. I forget the name. Nakib, right. But then when we left the town and there was nobody around, she took that off and was just wearing a t-shirt and a hat. Meaning to say, if you dress immodestly in the city, they come after you. So, I mean, maybe it's not against the law, but you're definitely not free to wear what you want. So, and also, by the way, it's against the law in Saudi Arabia. Now, they were very hospitable to us. They're very hospitable. I have zero complaints against them, but I mean, as hosts, I have zero complaints. Other areas I do. But the point is, they said it's against the law to worship Judaism publicly. You're not allowed to practice your faith in public. So it's not free there.
Did you put on your tefillin outside?
not only did I put on my phone on Mount Sinai, well, there was, of course, we prayed at sunrise at Mount Sinai, but on the way there, on the way back, I was traveling and I wanted to pray. So on the way there, we went through on the airport. El Al, if you try to pray on El Al, you get dirty looks from the flight attendants. They start, they stare at you. They say you have to sit down, this, there. On this plane to Saudi Arabia, they have a whole room designated for prayer on the plane. And they said you could go in there and pray. So we went in there. It was like a mosque, but there's carpets, and they pointed the direction towards Mecca, and they let us pray there. Nobody said, and on the way back in the Riyadh airport, they have a big, beautiful room for prayer. And everybody there was saying, the Muslim prayer chant. And I went in the back and I put on my towels and tefillin and prayed. And nobody said anything to me. Nobody minded.
Couldn't get a minion together.
We did not have a minion. We had a minion when we were there, but on the plane ride there, we had a minion. But that would have been, we were nervous that would have attracted too much attention. And also on the way back, we didn't have the minion already on the flight back. So, but people were cautious about making like a big public display. So just praying by yourself is okay, but making a big public display would be concerning. All right, well, we're going to stop here so we can pray. Speaking of prayers. All right.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.